I had always been drawn to the dimly lit corners of the city where the whispers of forgotten histories lingered in the air. That night, I stumbled upon a bar I'd never seen before, tucked away in an alley that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The sign above the door was faded, the name indecipherable, but something about it called to me. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and the scent of aged wood. A few patrons sat scattered around, their faces obscured by shadows. The bartender, a tall man with piercing green eyes, nodded as I took a seat at the worn counter. "What'll it be?" he asked. "Whiskey neat," I replied, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my stomach. He poured the amber liquid and slid the glass toward me. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. As I glanced around, I noticed a mirror behind the bar. Unlike the rest of the place, it was pristine, reflecting the room with an unnerving clarity. But when I looked closer, I realized my reflection was off. The face staring back at me had a haunted look, eyes filled with a sorrow I thought I'd buried long ago. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the image remained unchanged. "Long day?" the bartender asked, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "Yeah, you could say that," I murmured. "Does that mirror play tricks, or am I just tired?" He glanced at the mirror and then back at me. "This place has a way of showing you things you might not want to see." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Everyone who comes here is searching for something, even if they don't know it." I scoffed lightly. "I'm just here for a drink." He gave a knowing smile but didn't respond. I turned my attention back to my glass, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure at the far end of the bar, a woman in a dark dress, her face hidden by a veil. Curiosity got the better of me. "Who's that?" I nodded in her direction. The bartender's expression grew serious. "Maybe someone you should talk to." I hesitated but decided to approach her. As I drew nearer, I felt a growing sense of familiarity. "Excuse me," I said softly. She lifted her head, and my breath caught. It was Emily, my ex-girlfriend, the one who vanished without a trace 2 years ago. "Emily, is that you?" She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Why did you stop looking for me?" I didn't know where else to turn," I stammered. "The police, everyone said there were no leads." "You gave up," she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. Suddenly, the room around us shifted. The patrons disappeared, the walls warped, and I found myself standing in a dense forest at dusk, the place where Emily had gone missing. Panic surged through me. "What's happening?" "You need to remember," her voice echoed from all directions. Images flashed before my eyes, fragments of memories I'd suppressed. The argument we'd had that day, her running into the woods, me shouting after her but not following. The guilt I'd carried but refused to acknowledge. "I'm so sorry," I cried out. "I should have gone after you." The trees seemed to close in around me, shadows stretching like grasping hands. Emily's figure appeared among them, blending with the darkness. "It's not too late," she said. "What can I do?" I pleaded. "Find me." Her voice was barely audible. "Let me rest." Just as quickly as it had come, the vision faded, and I was back in the bar, collapsed on the floor. The bartender stood over me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else, perhaps understanding. He helped me to my feet. "Sometimes the past doesn't let go until you face it." I nodded weakly, my mind racing. "Is any of this real?" "That's for you to decide," he replied, "but you have a choice to make." I looked around. The bar seemed different now. Silent, empty. Even the air felt heavier. "Thank you," I whispered. though I wasn't sure for what. Stepping out into the cool night, I took a deep breath. The city sounds felt distant, muffled. I knew what I needed to do. Over the next weeks, I revisited the place where Emily disappeared. I retraced every step, talked to anyone who might have seen something, and refused to accept the dead ends. Finally, a lead surfaced. A hiker who recalled seeing someone matching her description near an old cabin deep in the woods. With a group of volunteers, I searched the area. We found the cabin, long abandoned. Inside, hidden beneath floorboards, were remnants of belongings: Emily's scarf, her bracelet, evidence that she'd been there. While we never found her, being able to uncover even a piece of the truth brought a sense of closure I'd never thought possible. I reported everything to the authorities, and the case was reopened. One evening I returned to that mysterious bar to thank the bartender, but it was gone. In its place stood an old, boarded-up building that looked like it hadn't been occupied for decades. I stood there, stunned. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream? But in my pocket, I found a coaster from the bar, the faint outline of its indecipherable name etched into the worn paper. I smiled to myself. Maybe some places exist between worlds, giving us the nudge we need to face what we fear most. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Emily's disappearance, I allowed myself to hope, to move forward. The past was still with me, but it no longer held me captive. Sometimes the shadows we run from are the ones that lead us back to the light. I pushed open the heavy door of the old bar, cold air trailing behind me. Dim lighting cast shadows over worn tables, and murmurs of quiet conversations blended with soft jazz. I needed a drink to take the edge off after the day I'd had. Sliding onto a bar stool, I caught the bartender's eye. "Whiskey neat," I said, rubbing my temples. He poured without a word. As I sipped, I sensed someone beside me. A man in a dark coat sat a few stools away, his eyes fixed on me. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the warmth spreading through my chest. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low. He had moved closer, now just one seat over. "You could say that," I replied cautiously. He nodded slowly. "Sometimes a drink isn't enough to escape." I frowned. "Do I know you?" "Not yet." A faint smile tugged at his lips. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I finished my drink and signaled for another. The bartender seemed oblivious to the exchange. The man continued to watch me, his gaze unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Excuse me?" I snapped, irritation creeping in. "It's not safe, not tonight." "Look, I'm just trying to have a quiet drink," I said, turning away. "They've been following you." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" He sighed. "You have something they want." I laughed nervously. "I think you've got the wrong person." He shook his head. "No mistakes, they won't stop." I stood up, grabbing my coat. "I think it's time for me to leave." He reached out, his grip firm on my wrist. "Leaving won't help." "Let go of me!" I yanked my hand away. The bartender glanced over. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I muttered, forcing a tight smile. Outside, the night air was biting cold. The street was empty, under flickering streetlights, casting eerie pools of light. I started walking, the sound of my footsteps echoing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw nothing. The sidewalk stretched endlessly ahead, the quiet unsettling. I pulled out my phone to call a cab, but the screen glitched, static flickering across it. "Great," I mumbled, shoving it back into my pocket. A whisper drifted through the air, sending a chill down my spine. Who's there? I called out. Silence. I quickened my pace. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, unintelligible but urgent. I broke into a run. Streetlights above me began to flicker, then one by one, they went out, plunging the street into darkness. Panic surged. Footsteps echoed behind me now, multiple sets closing in. I darted into an alleyway, heart pounding, hoping to lose whoever was following. Emerging on the other side, I froze. I was back in front of the same bar. Impossible. Gasping for breath, I looked around wildly. The door creaked open, and the man stepped out. I told you, he said calmly. You can't escape them. This can't be happening, I whispered. What's going on? He approached slowly. You have something that doesn't belong to you. I don't know what you're talking about. He pointed to my neck. The pendant. I reached up, fingers touching the silver pendant, a gift from my grandmother. This? It's just a family heirloom. It's a key, he said. They've been searching for it. Behind him, shadows began to coalesce, forming humanoid shapes with glowing eyes. Who are they? I whispered. They are the forgotten, he said. Spirits trapped between worlds. They need the key to return. The shadows advanced, encircling me. Give them the pendant, he urged. I clutched it tightly. No. The whispers grew into a deafening roar. Please, he said softly. It's the only way. Trembling, I lifted the chain over my head, extending it toward the shadows. One reached out, and as it touched the pendant, a blinding light erupted. I shielded my eyes. When I opened them, the shadows were gone. The streetlights flickered back to life. The man stood before me, his expression gentle. It's done, he said. What just happened? I asked weakly. You set them free and freed yourself. I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of relief washing over me. Who are you? I asked. He smiled faintly. Just a guide. Before I could say more, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, the cold air biting my skin, trying to comprehend. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen was functioning again. A message flashed. Thank you. I looked around, but the street was empty. Taking a deep breath, I started walking home. The whispers were gone, but their memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's events. I never considered myself a superstitious person. Ghost stories and urban legends were just that. Stories. But one night changed everything I thought I knew about reality. After a grueling week at work, I decided to unwind at a bar I'd never visited before. It was tucked away in a dimly lit alley downtown, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The neon sign flickered the name The Haven, casting eerie shadows on the wet pavement. Inside, the place had a vintage charm. Soft jazz played from an old jukebox, and the warm glow of antique lamps bathed the room in amber light. I took a seat at the bar and ordered my usual, a bourbon neat. As I sipped my drink, I noticed a man sitting a few seats down. He was dressed in a sharp suit that seemed a bit out of style, like something from the 1940s. A fedora sat tilted on his head, shadowing his eyes. He raised his glass to me. Rough day? He asked. I shrugged. You could say that. Just needed a change of scenery. He nodded knowingly. Sometimes a new place can make all the difference. We struck up a conversation. His name was Victor, and he had a way of speaking that made every word feel significant. We talked about work, life, and the city. There was something comforting about his presence, like talking to an old friend. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The bartender kept our glasses filled without us asking. I glanced around and realized the bar was empty except for us. Quiet night, I remarked. Victor smiled faintly. It's just us now. I checked my watch, surprised to see the hands frozen at midnight. That's odd. My watch must have stopped. Victor glanced at it. Time has a way of standing still here. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? He leaned in slightly. This place is special. It finds people who need it. Before I could respond, the lights flickered. The warm glow shifted to a dim, cold light. The room that once felt cozy now seemed aged and neglected. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, and the mirrors were clouded with dust. I stood up abruptly. What's going on? Victor remained seated, his expression unreadable. Sometimes we get lost in places we shouldn't be. Panic started to set in. I reached for my coat. I think I should go. He nodded slowly. Perhaps you should. But before you do, he slid a small, worn photograph across the bar. Hesitating, I picked it up. It was a picture of a group of people outside the very bar we were in, dated 1942. My heart nearly stopped when I saw a familiar face. Mine. This has to be a joke, I laughed nervously. Is this some kind of prank? Victor looked at me with a hint of sadness. Some souls are drawn back here, repeating the same nights, searching for something they lost. I backed away, the room spinning. I'm leaving. I headed for the door, but when I pushed it open, it led not to the alley, but to a long, dim corridor. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see Victor standing a few feet away. You can't leave until you remember, he said softly. Remember what? I shouted. He pointed to a door at the end of the corridor. Sometimes facing the truth is the only way out. With no other option, I walked towards the door, my hands trembling. I pushed it open to find a small room, a makeshift office. Papers were strewn across a desk, and the smell of old books filled the air. On the desk lay another photograph. This time it was clearer. It showed me and Victor standing together outside the bar, both dressed in 1940s attire. Memories flooded back, laughter, plans, a friendship. We were business partners, opening the haven together. I spun around. This can't be real. Victor stepped forward. We had dreams once, big ones, but they were cut short. Fragments of memories pieced themselves together. The war, the conscription, the night before we were set to leave. A fight, a betrayal. You left me, I whispered. You took everything and disappeared. He nodded solemnly. I made mistakes, and I've been here ever since, waiting for a chance to make it right. Why am I here? I asked, desperation in my voice. Because you've been wandering too, lost in your own life, seeking something you couldn't name. Now you know. Anger surged through me. So what now? Am I stuck here with you? He shook his head. That's up to you. Forgiveness can set us both free. I closed my eyes, the weight of decades pressing down on me. Could I forgive him? Did I want to? After a long silence, I looked at him. I forgive you. A faint smile crossed his lips. The room began to brighten, the old wallpaper restoring itself, the scent of fresh wood replacing the musty air. Victor extended his hand. Thank you. I reached out and shook it. The moment our hands touched, a warmth spread through me. The bar returned to its lively state. Laughter and music filled the air once more. I found myself standing alone near the entrance. The bartender called out, "Need anything else before you go?" I glanced back. Victor was nowhere to be seen. "No, I'm good," I replied, my voice steady. Stepping out into the cool night air, I felt lighter, as if a burden I didn't know I carried had been lifted. The city lights seemed brighter, the sounds clearer. As I walked home, I passed a storefront with a television playing the news. A headline caught my eye. Local man inherits historic building. Plans for new bar announced. The photo showed me standing in front of the very building I'd just left. Confusion washed over me. I didn't own a building, did I? Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a set of old keys and a business card that read, "The Haven, Grand Reopening." I stared at the card, a sense of déjà vu enveloping me. Maybe some stories don't end. They just begin anew. From that night on, I knew my life had changed. Whether it was a haunting, a dream, or something beyond understanding, I embraced it. After all, some places and some encounters are meant to find us.